users interact with. We come in with the knowledge of what creates kind of a safe facility, a good user experience, and the CIP engineering, they're the ones that make it come to fruition with the design element. Here we have a great green infrastructure. They're the ones that make sure it drains properly. So now jumping into some recent projects, the first being these unsignalized crosswalks. This is actually one of our discretionary line items. So what we do is we look at the unsignalized crosswalks in the city and do kind of one project to update several locations. So the most recent was we did 6 locations, 3 on Main Street. This is, between Geary and San Luis Road on the northwest side of town. Then we had 2 on Bancroft and 1 on Mount Diablo Boulevard at the Ace Hardware. So of these 6 locations, there's a lot in common here. We have 5 lanes of travel, with that 5th lane being either a 2-way left turn lane or a dedicated left turn lane. Each of these roadways have speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour, and that's the posted speed, so keep that in mind that if drivers are actually going the posted speed, or more or less. And then each of these, just on those 2 characteristics, there's this possibility of a multiple threat pedestrian crash. So going over kind of what that is. So on the graphic on the left, we have car A, which is the one that's curbside. And when you have these really wide roadways, there's a lot of things coming at a driver. They may not be expecting or even notice a pedestrian standing there. But of, any car that's going to see it, it's more likely that car A would see the ped. By the time they see, react, and stop, they can be close to the crosswalk. And what that does is for any car approaching in car B here, approaching in this other lane, what car A is, it blocks the line of sight between the ped and car B. So now this ped essentially has to enter into another conflict point where the line of sight is poor. So what we did, how do we address these? We wanted to improve the crosswalk visibility. We wanted to slow drivers down so, they have enough time to perceive, react, and stop accordingly. So what we did is we did hardened lane lines in this, very prominent feature. So the hardened lane lines are those solid white stripes, and what we did is we narrowed the travel lane. We added the paddle signs, we added Shark's Teeth yield line, and just based on feedback we've gotten so far, positive and negative, across the board, everyone's slowing down. So we are going to be doing some data collection post-installation once, school returns and people have gotten used to it to really gauge how successful this has been. And then we would be looking to do more of these types of improvements around the city. And the staff contacts would be myself or Rashad Culver, who is the CIP engineer. Another one is Lennon Lane. So Lennon Lane is in the Shadelands Business Park. The business park, it has that shopping center with the Safeway and all those restaurants. There's a school in there. There's a very well-used recreational facility. We have a brewery. There's access to the Iron Horse Trail, and on the weekend we have farmers market. So it's a business park, but it's really transitioning into something more. And with that in mind, the Shadelands multimodal plan was done a couple years ago, and it called for a separated bikeway on many of the streets in the business park, but on Lennon Lane. So where this comes in to the CIP side is that Lennon Lane, the pavement, needed improvements. So we took the opportunity to implement what was in the plan. So down below, we have on the left side what was existing and then what we designed for. So there is 2 22-foot travel lanes before. There's no parking, the bicycles mixed with the vehicles, and there was a posted speed of 35 miles per hour. What we did is we made the travel lanes 10 feet. We added parking on one side, and then created these separated bikeways. And with all of those design considerations, we had a desired speed of 25 miles per hour. So on the right here, you'll see kind of the post installation. I want to say this was installed over several months, and we'll kind of go over that. But this was the city's first full separated bike facility. We've used the material and done this in practice over on Bancroft at the Cocoa Canal Trail crossing, but it was really just for a short distance, and this was really the first full segment. So it was a really good learning opportunity for what, on the design side as well as the maintenance side. And going in, we knew that there was going to be a maintenance challenge of how to clean the curbs. Our typical street sweepers can't fit into this narrow area. And so, that is something that's across the board in every agency, something that people are dealing with and looking to address that moving forward. This is a bus route, so post-installation, we made slight adjustments for the buses. And then striping is not enough. So because of COVID, there was a shipping delay of these posts, and for several months, it was just the striping in place. And so what we noticed is that we had changed the context of the roadway so much, and people were driving in the striped parking lane. It was not as clean of an installation as we had hoped. And I would be the staff contact for this project. So the next CIP transportation kind of teamwork is pavement management, and that's we have like an ongoing program that covers many types of projects, and this one, the slurry and cape seal, is really a preventative maintenance project we're going to be talking about. So annually, we collect pavement condition index, a PCI, and what this allows us to do is understand how well our roadways are doing, which one's deteriorating more rapid. Maybe we can send our street crews out and they can do some kind of patch repair. But this is our way to inventory our facilities. So talking about kind of what this is. So based on the extent and depth of our pavement deterioration, we'll do kind of either a slurry seal or a cape seal. And really this is just taking off the first few inches, maybe a little more for cape, and then replacing it with a seal to preserve the lower levels. So again, slurry seal is a couple inches, and then cape's a little bit more. And cape, anytime we do cape, we trigger ADA improvements. So this would be concrete work, curb ramps, if appropriate, bulb outs, depending on where we're doing the work. So this summer, we're doing both a slurry and cape seal, and this area is on the left side. It's the neighborhood, it's south of Walnut Avenue, between Northgate High and the San Carlos area. It's most of the streets in those boxes, not all of them, but that's kind of the bulk of the area. And then you'll notice on the right side, we have where the curb ramps are, and you'll notice it's not, every single corner, but where the dots are is where that cape seal treatment was needed. And also highlighted here is, this neighborhood has a lot going on. We have schools, the Ignacio Canal Trail cuts through, and then we have school crossings. So this is our opportunity. There's a blank slate coming in, so we can come in with striping improvements. So first one, simply stop our placement. Some of these new intersections, they don't have curbs. And now with curbs, we want to make sure that where we're telling cars to stop are behind the pedestrian path. Simple. School crosswalks, there's a lot of just conventional 2 stripes out there, so we're going to be doing ladder. And then for these trail crossings, we're going all at it. So we're going to be installing, it's called a 444, and it's the white and the green that's currently at Bancroft and the Cocoa Canal Trail. And it alerts drivers like, hey, yeah, this is a crosswalk, but there's also cyclists here. We're going to be visually narrowing the travel lanes, so striping an edge line, adding a center yellow, doing shark's teeth, and all the signage that goes with that. And for this project, the slurry seal would be Michael Hawthorne, and he's the CIP engineer who oversees kind of the construction of it all. So the other side of this pavement management is a complete street rehab, and that's what's going on with South Main. So the limits of this South Main work is from Newell Avenue on the north side all the way down to the northbound 680 off-ramp. It's really this gateway corridor to downtown and major destinations. We got the Kaiser Hospital, we have Los Alamos High School, residential, the Creekside neighborhood, the Park Mead neighborhood. And it really is an active pedestrian area with very limited crossing opportunities, with the only crossing opportunities being at the actual signals. And like I said, the pavement needs to be rehabilitated, so this is CIP, and then traffic jumps on with some additional safety improvements. The first is a new mid-block crosswalk. This would be between Lilac, which is the entrance to the high school, and Newell. Currently, it's about 1,000 feet between the intersections, and so we're putting a mid-block right in the middle. Flashing lights, curb extensions, lane narrowing. We're adding that to the project. And then we also are doing improvements at the actual high school intersection. And the recommendations as part of this project actually came about from our Safe Routes to School study and our observations. On the left there, you can see kind of the mass exits of kids crossing and really just the inability for vehicles to even leave the school. It takes, of all the schools that we observed, this one took the longest to kind of flesh out. And really this is their only entrance to the school parking lot. So by separating the PEDs from the vehicles with this PED scramble, we can, completely eliminate that conflict point, but also hopefully flush the vehicles out easier. And then we are also adding some curb extensions on the south side. We would have done all the corners, but Kaiser has large delivery trucks, so we had to accommodate those. And there's a very popular drop-off location, or the movement is a southbound U-turn. And so we couldn't really bulb out that corner because it would have hindered a very well-used drop-off location. And with that, open it up to any comments or questions.
Great. Rob, do you want to start us off? We'll go in seat order.
Sure. So I had a couple questions. Where did you get the idea to do the hardened lane lines out of just striping?
So we saw it in Fremont. Fremont had done it before, and they have we've been looking at Fremont because they have a really strong Vision Zero plan, and they've had great success, and so we've been looking to them for their protected intersection design and kind of see what they've done with, just cheap materials.
Have they, did you see any that were raised? So in Oakland, they'll use a hardened center line where they have I would maybe call it a super mini speed hump. It's about 6 inches wide. It's yellow, about 6 feet long, and it fits right on the lane line itself. Did you consider anything like that, or are you in the testing stages? Would you be open to looking into something like that? It was an interesting idea that I saw in Oakland.
So I'd be curious where in Oakland. So I know I've seen them on striped bulb outs. I know I've seen them in between the double yellow, but I don't know if I've seen them as a white hardened lane line.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I was just curious. And then on Lennon Lane with your cycle tracks, were you able to find a way to do the street sweeping? Because that seems to be a major issue.
So currently what happens now, so there's really two needs for our guys to access the curb, and it's for the curb for the street sweeping to clean out the gutter, and then also to access the drainage inlets. So for curb cleanup right now, it's all manual, I believe, with leaf blowers, and it's very time intensive and labor intensive. For our crew that needs to access the inlet and bring in a large pump truck, there's a tool that they can just remove the bollards as they need to and access the drainage inlets that way.
Okay. Have you, and maybe it's too early, have you considered raised features, raised medians rather than paint and plastic? Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely something that ideally we want to do, because from a maintenance perspective, they would way prefer that. It's really just comes down to money, and this was something that paint and the bollards are cheaper, so we wanted to get something out there as part of that need to improve the pavement at that time.
Right, yeah, and people then get used to the design and the concept. So, yeah, definitely understand that. And then on South Main, in one of your pictures, it looked like you were doing a lane reduction, but I don't think that's right. That would be the northbound, which would be at the top of your page, going down. There are 2 lanes there, or is there only 1 lane there?
There are 2 lanes. That's just
It's just the orientation of the drawing.
the orientation of the drawing, and that kind of darker shaded area is the concrete and the curb.
Ah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, we're keeping the same amount of lanes.
Okay. Those are my only questions.
Thanks, Sam.
Sure, I just have a couple. The crosswalk improvements that are designed to slow down traffic, et cetera. You did talk a little bit about some visibility issues there, and I'm curious if you considered the flashing crossing, or was that just a budgetary concern?
So budget was obviously a part of the decision, but what's really good about the flashing lights is, it's a active detection. So a pet will push the button, the lights will flash. When the roadway is so wide and there's so much going on with a wide roadway, that car maybe in that center lane, that flashing light, those flashing lights aren't as effective as say a narrow lane. And so really it would be ideal if we could do like a center refuge island. But each one of these locations have very popular driveways, and we would have to do a further study of what we're doing limiting access to these driveways by doing a median to just install an RFB. So we're not ruling them out at all of these locations. It did just come down to what can we do now with the biggest bang for our buck.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then my other question is a little bit, I guess, bigger picture. With the crazy atmospheric rains and weather that we had this last winter, did it set back our pavement maintenance and repair at all? Was there any impact there budgetarily, or?
So I know from the massive rains there was damage to pavement, sinkholes, that kind of thing. I know just from a staff time level, a lot of even on the design side and the engineering side, we were on our feet addressing kind of other issues. So there was maybe a time frame kind of setback, as well as both a roadway physical well-being. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
No questions.
Awesome. I've been taking Bancroft a bunch lately since Oak Grove on Treat to Bancroft is being redone by that other neighboring city of ours. And so today I decided to stop and actually walk across that wide lane and not just drive it in prep. And it does give you this feel like, oh wait, I came into the street too fast. And it did feel safer that it was being addressed. And I think maybe a meeting or two ago, I was asking about the bike lane improvements. How do we know they were working? What studies were being done and stuff? And I think I was suggested that I actually get out and feel things. And so I did. And I just really appreciate feeling it and seeing it and experiencing the difference today. And then my my one question is on the Cape Seal. When do you decide to do, what triggers that specifically, which then triggers like the ADA improvements to the sidewalks? I think you said it, but if you can clarify a little bit.
Yeah, and this is not my expertise, so this is, you know, how best I can describe it. But the pavement condition index, what they'll do is they'll look at kind of the surface level cracking, and there's different cracking. And what it essentially alludes to is the deterioration of a subbase. And when we do this for the whole city and we see which roads are failing, you know, you can identify pockets. And it's kind of temporal if you think about it. It's like, okay, we did this one 20 years ago. This whole neighborhood is kind of showing the signs of it needs to be resealed. And so it's really just what from a preventative maintenance do we need to do now? So it's data driven based on, you know, what's worse at the moment, essentially, from a preventative maintenance standpoint, not like a rehab everything like South Main standpoint. So there's no real trigger. It's just like, let's look at the whole city and let's see what's failing and where, and let's, you know, try to seal it up.
Okay, thanks. Just because when my neighborhood the streets got totally redone and they look nice, until PG&E yesterday decided to spray paint everywhere on them. They did not do the ADA compliance, where sidewalks are probably 60 years old, and I was just curious about it from that standpoint, because we would love more ADA compliant spaces on our sidewalk.
Yeah, it really just goes, because there's many layers of a roadway, so it just has to do with how far down that failure is.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else? Good. David?
The bows, I'm sorry, the bows, how long do they last?
How long do the posts last? So they're literally mounted into the pavement. So, you know, a simple bump will scuff them up, but, you know, they should still be there. It would take, you know, kind of a really intense force to pop them off. You can see some on Bancroft that have been there a while, and they show the signs of being there a while, but they're still physically there. So they've been proven to last a while under, you know, some impact.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I see no members of the public in the audience. Do we have any online or on the phone?
No.
Okay, great. We'll skip ahead then. Okay, are we on to the next?
One question, do we
Yeah, go.
give comments at the end, or?
Oh, go ahead, go. Sorry, do you mean to skip comments? Go.
Okay, it wasn't a question, so that's why I wanted.
Yeah, sometimes I separate them out, but
Okay.
tonight's, I think, a lighter agenda,
So
so.
we can keep them together. It was just that I can't remember the name of the jurisdiction, but others I think have done it too. There's a machine that it spits out the concrete, and you can actually, you put a couple of dowels in the pavement, and then the machine puts out a quick dry concrete that you don't need forms to install. And they can do that without doing, it appears they can do that without doing detailed engineering drawings where you go out and survey. You just have a couple of checkpoints to make sure you've got the right elevations, and then this machine, based on the width that you need, just goes down the roadway and extrudes, is that the right word? Spits out the concrete, and it dries immediately, so there's no forms, it's quick. It seems like it would be a lot cheaper, not as cheap as paint and plastic, but as Walnut Creek gets more mature around these kinds of solutions, and you learn how to solve the drainage and the street sweeping issues, it would, I think it would be a good next step to provide a better environment for both the drivers and the cyclists. And I can't remember the name of the city. Might be Santa Monica. I can find that out and send it to you. It's pretty cool.
Thank you. And we do have an asphalt extruder. And if you look over at Broadway and Lincoln, right near the library, that northbound approach, that used our asphalt extruder kind of the same way. But thank you. We've not, at least I was unaware of a concrete one.
Anyone else?
I live in the neighborhood that's getting the pavement treatments, and was very excited to see some of the concrete intersection work with the ADA compliance piece of it, and was wondering what had triggered it. So appreciate tonight's report. And I had also encountered the lane hardening on Bancroft and on North Main Street recently, and was wondering what was going on because I didn't recall. I was like, did I overlook something that we talked about at Transportation Commission? But here you were tonight. So it was great to hear a little bit more about the rationale, because it was something I had not seen before. And I think just because of the novelty of it, it made me slow down a little bit. So I'm curious to see kind of longer term what the impacts are. It was a little bit perplexing at first, which I think is not a bad thing, because again, it just causes you to be more conscious of what's going on in the roadway. So thanks for all of those updates.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. The next on the agenda is, for the Commission's consideration, is bicycle parking requirement updates. At this time, I invite staff to provide their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna.
Oh, no, it's actually on the desktop already. Then you gotta share it on the Zoom. Zoom back to Zoom and then share that screen.
Close the other one up first.
Oh.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Henry Rue, and I'm a transportation planner with the traffic engineering team. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about a proposed update to our zoning code. Very early stages here, but basically to amend our bike parking requirements. Recently, there's been a huge raft of state laws. I'm sure you're aware. Many of them are relevant here, but the biggest one is AB 2097. That eliminates automobile parking requirements entirely from anything within a half mile of a major transit stop. In our case, the most relevant there are the Walnut Creek and Pleasant Hill BART station. So that is in effect right now. That is adopted state law, and it supersedes any local ordinances on the matter. Our existing bicycle parking standards right now are a percentage of the automobile parking standards. So that means that within all of those sites within a half mile of BART, right now we have 0 bicycle parking required at all. So we need to do something about that. So essentially the idea is to put into our code specific standards for bicycle parking based on square footage and other relevant standards like units for residential enrolled students for schools so that they can stand on their own. And this not only allows us to avoid that AB 2097 problem and evaluate things more objectively, but it also means that when we're revising either standard, they can be changed independently of each other, which means that you don't have to worry about lowering or, for example, instituting parking maximums that then put bike parking maximums into place. So on the staff report, there's that chart that shows kind of the proposed numbers. We're going to go through all those specifically, kind of one by one, see what it means in practice. But just first, I want to clarify, short-term is referring to publicly available bicycle parking, whereas long-term is not necessarily available to the public. In a case of like an office context, it could be for only the workers. Residential, it could be for only residents. It's often a cage or a locker. It has to be secure to really be defined that way. So you can see here the specific chart. We're going to go one by one. But I do want to clarify tonight, we are only looking at the required amount. So the design standards for short-term and for long-term, those are going to be included in an objective design standards update as part of a greater city initiative. Working on that, you will see them fairly soon. But tonight, this is just about the number required. So in practice, retail, the proposed update is one space for 1,500 square feet of a rentable floor area. That is a common standard. It shows up on all the plans. It's essentially the usable space. So what we have proposed here, it's heavily slanted towards short-term because you have retail, you've got people coming in. In practice, that would mean that the Rossmore Safeway required about 7 bike racks and 4 long-term spaces for workers. Banks are a more even split. You've got the in and out short-term use and the workers, so we proposed 50-50 there. F&M Bank has 5,000 square feet, so that would require 1 rack and 2 long-term spaces. Public assembly, this one's a little bit more different. This is based on public assembly area, which is for like clubs, churches, lodges. This is the area where the people actually come in and be, so back rooms and the like are excluded from this. And again, this is something that shows up on the plans. It has to be noted in development review, so it's not really any extra work to enforce using the standard. So the example here is North Creek Church. It's about 10,000 square feet. That would require 8 racks and 5 long-term spaces. Office, it's 1 per 2,000. It's heavily slanted towards long-term because you're mostly looking at workers who are using this rather than day-to-day people coming in, customers, but there is some of that required. So in this case, the atrium, big office building, 120,000 square feet. That would be 8 short-term racks and 44 long-term spaces. Medical care, similarly, you've got a lot more kind of slanted towards long-term. It's mostly workers, but you do have people coming in. For medical care, they're not necessarily going to be biking, but it can happen. You want to leave the options there. So that would be for this huge, John Muir, million plus square feet, it would be 70 racks and about 400 long-term spaces. And residential is based on dwelling units rather than square footage. And we've got a nice, easy to understand ratio of 1 per 1. So Noma Apartments at 135 would be 17 racks and 100 spaces. Hotel similarly is based on guest rooms rather than square footage, 1 per 8. This leaves us with 2 required for residents in at about 100 guest rooms, and then 9 long-term spaces. And school is a little different because in practice for public schools, the state architect can essentially do whatever they want. So this would be enforced for private schools and suggested. This is be the numbers we send back if they ask us what we think, but we can't really enforce it for public schools. But just as an example, Las Lomas has 600 students registered for its maximum enrollment. So that would require 57 racks and 38 spaces. This is a pretty progressive standard. Schools specifically as institutions, as children are the future, we wanted to focus on those as a priority for more advanced bicycle parking standards. And similarly, because of the specific conditions involved, short-term parking also is proposed to be required to be secure for schools uniquely. So that could just mean isolated out of the way, but it's not as open to everyone. There's some protection involved. Finally, we have light industrial, which is a little weird because there's very little of this actually in the city. This is more of a future proofing. Maker's Row up north by Treat is zoned that way, but not any actual uses really do that in practice. But just as like a hypothetical example, if a 100-square-foot Home Depot showed up, that would be 3 racks and 20 long-term spaces. So these proposed standards were based on, other jurisdictions like Oakland and Davis based on best practices, but they were also based on Walnut Creek standards in part. We basically did a big comparison, massive spreadsheet to look at with the automobile parking required now, what does that look like in practice? What is the number that is actually needed based on square feet? That was all evaluated together, and we came up with these proposed standards, but we are seeking your feedback on them. That's why I included the practical examples. If you have suggestions, thoughts, comments, unique concerns, we'd love to hear them. So I'm going to open it up to you now.
All right, we'll start in the middle. Commissioner Cagle, any questions, comments?
I have questions. Would these be for new developments moving forward, or something that would have to be implemented throughout the city once the requirements are there?
So this would be in the zoning code. So the way that works in practice is that mostly it is just new developments.
Right.
If they come in for review, then we will review for this. So that's essentially how it would come up. If people are sending in plans, this is something that's getting checked against. But if it's minor, then it can just kind of stay existing non-compliant. And the other thing there is downtown is kind of an exception to the retail. We're looking at specific steps for that. We're kind of considering doing what Oakland did, which is just to allow existing racks in the public right-of-way within 50 feet of the entrance to qualify. We were also talking about it in the Lou program, but we're not forcing all of downtown to meet these standards if adopted immediately.
Right.
There's a lot of parking that we have provided there, and we want to find a way for that to qualify, either through an in lieu program or just by adding that stipulation.
Right, and within a half mile of transit, it sounds like there's a need per your presentation, so I was curious if there was going to be a requirement for the businesses and buildings within that area to be required to do it.
So for
Sounds like just new.
the new ones going up, definitely. For the existing ones, technically, once this is adopted, it would be existing non-compliant. So once they come in for anything, really, anything exterior or kind of big improvements that need a building permit, a planner is looking at that and they're saying, okay, you do not meet these requirements anymore. So it's not just whole new buildings where this comes up, alterations, renovations. That's kind of the standard for code updates because you can't force the whole city to do it all at once. It seems a little more feasible with bike racks, but in general, it's not. And even in this one, it would be pretty hard to do. So.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And then have you surveyed the business community about what they think their needs might be, or maybe what their current needs are? I mean, looking at the needs that were outlined for John Muir, for instance, it sounds like a lot. I'm just curious if you guys have surveyed our business community.
We have not yet. We're planning to reach out to them about that once we have a firm proposal for the downtown program. Especially, we want to go to them with something instead of this, kind of prototypical state.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Madam Vice Chair?
I had similar questions and was, I think, are we doing comments now too, or it doesn't matter? Okay, because we're not making any decisions, right? Okay. So one thing to just think about with medical facilities, particularly hospitals, is that it's not just patients, but it's a lot of staff and workers of various sorts and visitors. And so I think it makes sense to have like a pretty significant, right now it's pretty minimal and it's not anywhere near entrances. So I think that's also something to, I guess that probably wouldn't fall into zoning. Maybe this would come in with the different design requirements in terms of placement.
Sorry.
Because like right now there are places where they're technically on the grounds, there are bike racks, but they're very, very far away from the entrance that you have to enter the building. Like I noticed that at like the Shadeland Sports Complex, there are places where like the accessible bike racks that actually work are far away from like the specific activity that you're trying to get to, so it's not that convenient. And so if there's anything that we can do to increase, to make sure it's like actually usable and not, you know, in some hard to access, even if it's technically publicly accessible.
Yeah, definitely. So that is going to be in the design standards. We're going to have a firm
Okay.
definition for that. We're going to
Yeah.
kind of put it through its paces to make sure you can't have weird exceptions. We don't want people putting bike racks in their dark basement closets.
Right,
The point
yeah.
is to be accessible.
Yeah.
That's an important design standard, and it's going to be a big consideration for those.
And then are there any other mechanisms besides like a major renovation or something that requires the city to review plans for an existing building? Are there any other mechanisms to trigger compliance with this zoning or ways that the city could look at
There is
accelerating that?
There is code enforcement. If there's a code violation, residents can report that, and then it goes to code enforcement. They investigate. Often that means people have to come in with planning for an after-the-fact permit or things like that. I don't know that it would really be applicable here because they would probably get away with it under existing non-compliant. There's a lot of provisions for that. So I think in terms of like more aggressive timelines on city stuff, part one is getting this stuff adopted soon enough that all those new developments going up near BART have to abide by them. But the other side of that is just us providing accessible bike parking ourselves. We can do that faster than anything. We don't need to wait for any developments on that. And we are doing that downtown now already.
Okay, and then are these numbers, I mean, are from I guess your perspective, do they seem aspirational, or are they quite conservative in terms of like, you know, making sure this is going to be manageable for people? Like where do these numbers fall in terms of like being sort of future oriented versus kind of?
So the intent was to find a good balance. So we surveyed a lot of like really bike progressive cities like Davis, San Luis Obispo, and then we kind of calced out what ours would be by square footage. And in some cases, we split the difference. In some cases, we kind of hedged. Like with schools, we really wanted to lead from the front there. That's a very progressive standard. But if you look at like office building, you know, in Davis, they are 1 per 1,500 square feet. We proposed 1 per 2,000, and they also use gross. So that would mean that in practice, the needed bike rack would be like 60 instead of the, yeah, so we had 44 with these in Davis. That would require 60, for example.
Okay.
So in few cases, is it as aspirational as possible? It's mostly trying to be reasonable in terms of what we can practically implement and kind of what the residents are going to be amenable to. We're not trying to impose onerous restrictions on people. We're just trying to improve the infrastructure for this.
Okay. And then is there, with the state legislation, was this factored into the state legislation, or is this something where the city just kind of proactively looked at the fact that like this would mean there's no required bike parking and that, so?
Yeah, so the state legislation did not factor this in at all. Not all cities, some cities already have standards like this that are not tied to automobile parking. A lot of them do, especially a lot of the cities we looked at that were kind of on the more progressive side of things in this specific area. For the automobile-based cities with transit, this is just something that we kind of have to jump in and fix, or we'll see our requirements go away.
Yeah.
And that was not really a direct part of the state law.
Yeah, I'll add to that. The state law, understood that there could be bike parking requirements that are associated with vehicle parking requirements. So it mandated that the state put together some kind of task force to start working on bike parking requirements, which will happen in several years. And so that puts us in a little bit of a sticky position, because I guess there's something that could be said that we could still impose our existing bike parking requirements, but it just makes things more complicated. And considering, even in the North Downtown Specific Plan, we have parking maximums there, which are very aligned with typical transit-oriented development, along those lines of, less vehicle parking encourages people to take more trips by walking, biking, or transit. But then it impacts the bike parking requirement because that's directly tied, when in reality you'd want to probably offset that because you want people to take their bikes instead of cars. And so that maximum shouldn't really apply to the bike parking piece. So we're trying to how this all came about was our planning staff is working on updating these objective design standards, or establishing them. And they've been through the design review committee and to planning commission on this topic several times. It's not in final stages yet, but as part of that, they identified that bike parking needed to be addressed. And so they sort of handed it over to traffic engineering to look at, because, the bike parking piece, a lot of it is in the public right of way, but then even so, it's definitely impacting, the quantity of bike facilities we really should be anticipating or planning for on the streets. And then just generally from a transportation planning standpoint, trying to encourage more bicycling. So basically they handed it over to us, so we're going to take that through on their behalf. But it really came into that objective design standards, which, as Henry pointed out before, really stemmed from all these new housing state laws that went through.
Yeah, well, I'm really thankful that the other commissions and brought this discussion up, and that staff proactively is addressing this. So I just appreciate that, and I'm really supportive of making these changes, because that is concerning. if no parking is required, that would also eliminate bike parking potentially, and developers and other property owners, they are very cautious of what they're spending on, and it's easy to cut things. So I'm glad that we're taking a look at this, and I'm really supportive of the guidance, that the proposals that have been brought to us today.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I also appreciate that you're taking a look at this and updating them. I think that's important. But I do think it needs a little bit more work. Your John Muir is an example. If you provide the allocation that you are saying that you would provide there, that means 20% of all of the parking is bike parking. So that means that 1 out of 5 spaces that people could park in would be for a bicycle. And that might work for a Davis or another community that has extensive bike infrastructure, and it might work for a community that has flat streets with not a lot of topography. We have topography. I've brought it up multiple times about needing to have better connections over YVR, but it's a $10 to $20 million project just to get a single path in to provide a connection so you could even ride your bike to the medical center from here. And so I think there needs to be a little bit more work in looking at the parking ratios. One other one I'll just bring up is the office. 1 per 2,000 square feet. 2,000 square feet holds about 6 people in an office. That means 1 in 6 people are riding their bikes. I think that's aspirational, but I don't think even Berkeley and Oakland have those kinds of standards. Davis might, and I can understand why they would, but I don't know that you would find those in the Bay Area, even in our more progressive communities like Fremont or Berkeley or Oakland. So I would suggest that you give these another look. And normally I wouldn't mind because it's aspirational, but these take a lot of space. And so if you try to put 500 parking spaces on John Muir, or you try to put 55 spaces at this office complex, where do they go? They take up a lot of space. You look at how much space the bike lockers take up at BART, and you try to imagine, okay, I've got to fit 44 of those somewhere, especially in a renovation of an existing building where you want to get everybody up to code, but you don't have a blank slate to work from. You're working from an existing structure. I think the other thing I would try to do is in where you have mixed use areas like downtown, I think those are some real opportunities where it might be difficult to put the bike parking in front of the building that's being renovated or changed of use, but maybe there's a place, like you said, 50 feet away or 75 feet away, and I think that those kinds of that kind of flexibility is really important in the community. So I appreciate that you're incorporating that. And then, yeah, that's it. So I'm really happy you're doing it. I just think that it needs a little bit more work about the implications of the action, because once it's in your code, then we can't change it. It becomes more difficult for us to change it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Would you be able to go back to the medical center slide?
Yeah. So this, John Muir, it's an enormous number, but it's an enormous complex.
There-
You've got a
and-
lot of workers there.
Yeah, and they're actually in the garage. There is like a secured area where quite a large number of bikes are currently able to be parked securely. I don't know if how.
Yeah, so, and this is not more, this is just total.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd add to that. I mean, so the John Muir campus, that was planned at least a decade ago, more than that. And so it's been phased in over time. Obviously, the UCSF piece is under construction. They're almost done with that. But just to give you context, and I'm not sure if this is actually what the parking requirements were at the time, so I can't speak to what they have out there right now. But if you look at our code as it is right now, if you're going to build a brand new John Muir with this floor area, it would require 4,680 parking spaces, which means that because we require 10% bike parking, it would be like 468 if you're just looking at that baseline 10% taken of the parking spaces. But there is, I mean, I think we brought this item to you because we wanted to get a good feel for the direction that we were going in terms of how we deal with these bike parking spaces, because we had a lot of back and forth on the staff level about context sensitivity, what part of town it's in, is it adjacent to a trail or is it in the downtown, and how do we deal with that? And including, you know, looking at how do we start sharing that bike parking in the more urban areas. So there's a lot to look at still, but we feel like these ratios were a really good jumping off point based on sort of the direction that we wanted to head in terms of looking at this from a fresh perspective.
Awesome. Okay. First, in the downtown core area, how many bike racks are currently deployed within the city right away or available in a garage or anything? And do we know, like, how much are used? at all? Like an idea. It doesn't have to be exact numbers, but
Matt might know, but I'm sorry, I'm not sure about that
Yeah,
information.
we can follow up with you on that information, but generally speaking, we have received several requests from residents over the past 1 to 2 years, especially, I think, yeah, who were really requesting more bike parking, especially short-term bike parking in and around the downtown that was nearby the destinations that they were trying to get to. And so we've been adding them as we can, but that's part of a broader discussion in terms of how much bike parking we can provide in the downtown generally. And so that is different, but I guess it's related to what this is talking about. It's just that this in particular can apply to like a shopping center, the orchards, for example. Whereas, in the more urban environment, we have to think about what that approach really is and what that design standard could be.
yeah, well, that goes to my next question, right? How are you just looking at it? And that's helpful. So I was just curious, and yes, I think we would all say we would like to see more accessible bike parking downtown. So we encourage that. For this, I love what you guys are doing. I know how hard it is to change city zoning laws and require these things, so I appreciate the work you guys are putting into this. I would just suggest outreach to the businesses, right? In this case, talk to John Muir Health, just because that one's come up a couple times. Talk to the Downtown Association. Talk to the tourism board for the hotels. I think just that outreach, those conversations, I'm sure some people will object, right? The hotel doesn't want to have like 50 new bike parking spaces. But it's really just important to outreach to them, include them in the stakeholder. You're asking them to make the changes in time. Don't pass this and then go to them, right? At least include them in the conversation early, even if they don't go this way. But overall, I'm impressed. I think it's a good tact. I like where your numbers are going and your strategy behind the numbers. So thank you for the effort.
Thank you.
One more thought. It would be like this would be separate from this work, but it would be great to see other ways of incentivizing bike parking for like regardless of whether they would be required based off of zoning or renovation or whatever. But for people who just want to do this because it's the right thing to do or because it might help their business attract certain customers, it'd be great to see like if there would be some way of incentivizing property owners to install this type of infrastructure so that it's not just the stick of zoning code, but also the carrot of something. I don't know what that would be, but it would be great to see what we can do to encourage more of this.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Look into that.
Okay. I see no members of the public in the audience. Do we have any members online or?
No.
Awesome. Well, we always appreciate public comment and participation, so we always encourage people to join us. And I'm surprised Sam, your mom's not, here with a comment. Okay. So at this time, are there any commissioner comments overall? All right. Well, any announcements? I have one that I want to add. I was talking to a friend that was on San Jose Court in the San Miguel neighborhood, and I think a year or so ago, you guys came and presented. Thank you. Oops, sorry. Thank you. And you guys presented on some changes there to the bike and crosswalk there. And so I asked them, like, what did you think? Like, do you like this? Is it annoying? And she said, like, the one person, and they have 2 kids under the age of 10, and she said this was beneficial because somebody was going to get hit crossing the street. It was just horribly designed, and so it was just nice to hear that feedback. And then I proceeded to tell them our role here, and then they had a list of other complaints, which but I wanted to give you that feedback because I know how hard it is you work, and you don't necessarily hear like the good and the impact of it, and I thought that was important. The other announcement I have is the CCTA Citizens Advisory Committee, where I was serving as chair. I was reelected as chair. They apparently think I was doing a great job and decided to have me back. That was that. Anybody else?
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay. I hereby adjourn.
No, I have staff.
Staff. Sorry, I forgot staff.
It's okay.
They're most important.
Okay, so really quickly, I want to let you all know that after all of your hard work on the local roadway safety plan, we've been bringing updates to you over the past year, basically. We did take it to a study session on Tuesday, and we got really positive feedback. We are intending to take the final plan along with a resolution to council on Tuesday, August 1st. So thank you for all of your hard work, feedback, sitting through all of those sessions. We really, really appreciate it. We also, in anticipation of that plan getting adopted, applied for $300,000 grant funding from the feds on it's the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. And that would be so that we could start implementation of the safety plan, of the local roadway safety plan. And then we did get awarded a little under $200,000 for a curb management plan. And so actually Henry just used that terminology earlier in his presentation, but really it's talking about how we use the curb. Is it for parking? Is it for loading? Is it for something else? And so giving all those things sort of consideration, but we will be bringing that plan to you all, but also there will be many stakeholders involved in that, since it is in the downtown and will heavily involve the business community as well. So wanted to give you a heads up on that. And then also Brianna's been working on a Safe Routes to School study. And so we've been putting together those final recommendations, and just sort of as part of that, even though we don't necessarily have a deliverable ready yet, we know that school is back in session in about 4 weeks or maybe 3 weeks. So it's coming up soon. And so we'll be reaching out to all the schools in the city, just providing them with educational materials, just reaching out to get folks, aware, reminding them. We'll be doing a social media campaign just to remind them to slow down around schools. Kids are out again. So I just want to give you a heads up on that.
Awesome. All right. I didn't mean to not include staff updates because those were all important. So thank you. Anything else? Okay. Then I hereby adjourn this meeting on July 20th, 2023, the Transportation Commission. It says I can hit the gavel in a second, so I'm very excited for this. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 21st. Thank you, everybody.